States Army. And the second thing he said was, I'm going to create an army that's just as psychologically fit as physically fit. And the General Staff has read your work about the schools. We see that you train teachers in the skills of resilience, and then you measure their students for a couple of years. Well, that's the Army model. And I said, really? He said, yeah, we have 40,000 teachers in the Army. Really? He said, yeah, the drill sergeants. So your job, Dr. Seligman, will be to see to it that the 40,000 drill sergeants are trained in positive psychology. They will train the entire Army, and we will rigorously measure whether or not it reduces suicide, post-traumatic stress disorder, it increases medals, and increases performance. And indeed, that's what we've been doing for the last 2.5 years. So now, every month, 180 drill sergeants come to the University of Pennsylvania, and we take them through 8 days of what we know about PERMA and how to build it and then how to teach it, and they go out and teach the troops. Most psychological tests are about what's wrong with you. So we had to create a test of emotional fitness, social fitness, family fitness, spiritual fitness, PERMA, essentially. And all 1.1 million soldiers take the test once a year. And what we found, it is a predictor of suicide. It predicts very closely who's going to be promoted general in the Army on the basis of psychological strength. And just a little bit of data, very first data on what the intervention does. We have a mobile unit that we sent to Korea to train all the drill sergeants in Korea. And starting last July, Korea measured suicide attempts, and suicidal ideation. About half the soldiers have been trained in Korea. 85% of the suicidal stuff comes from the troops who have not had resilience training, 15% from those who have had resilience training. There's more to human life than the reduction of misery and suffering. I'm all for that. I've spent my whole life working on that. But that's only half of what we're interested in, that human life can do better than that. It can have PERMA in it. Britain has become center court for well-being and positive psychology. So you have a prime minister who's very interested in explicitly measuring well-being and claims he will hold himself accountable for public policy by changes in well-being. So if that comes off, that's an inflection point for the question of human flourishing and well-being. But there's at least one important barrier I cannot think through to the building of well-being in human beings. I throw this as a question mark. I was a minute part of the anti-smoking campaign in the United States 40 years ago, and there was an inflection point in the anti-smoking campaign. Everyone knew that cigarettes were bad for them cognitively, but in the early 1970s, it somehow became repulsive to smoke. It was like having pimples, zits, and immoral to smoke. It left the cognitive barrier and went under it. And then interestingly, in environmentalism and sustainability, we all knew it was bad to ruin the planet. But somehow in the 1980s, the mid-1980s, when you saw someone throw a plastic bottle out of a car, it became morally wrong and repulsive. So for well-being, the notion that there could be human flourishing to be a goal of national and international policy, we need to get beyond the knowledge about well-being being good for you to the notion that it's very attractive to have well-being. It's morally right to have well-being. There is a politics of flourishing and well-being. It's not a politics of left or right, which in my simplistic way I understand to be the question of who's going to achieve the ends of government, individuals by personal responsibility or the state. Rather, this is a restatement of what the ends of politics should be. So I'm arguing that free people choose PERMA, and that the well-being of the citizens of a nation is the goal of good government and public policy. And I believe that every human being can say yes to more positive emotion in their life. Every human being can say yes to more engagement in work, in love, in their leisure. Every human being can say yes to better relationships. Every human being can say yes to more meaning and purpose in life. And every human being can say yes to more positive accomplishment in life. And it's with that I want to claim that our future, our political future, may be not only the alleviation of misery, but the building of PERMA.
One of the things which has baffled some of the observers of this field is that a number of political leaders, including the Prime Minister here, President Sarkozy in France, Stephen Harper in Canada, have made quite bold commitments to measuring well-being and happiness and set themselves that as a test of their success. But none of them so far have actually committed any policies which might achieve the goal. So they've taken the measurement test, but not the actions. Why is that? As a psychotherapist, how would you explain this phenomenon?
Well, I think it's doing things in the right order to first measure. If we don't measure the right thing, we don't do the right thing. And then, of course, is the question, what policies would do it? And I don't know the particulars of why, but there are a lot of unknowns here. It's not as if there's a science, much more than what I've said, that actually has done interventions and showed that they increased well-being. Again, Britain is center court here as well. So in the last government, under the Labour government, 3 of the British local authorities decided they would explicitly train teachers to build well-being and resilience in students. And in fact, hundreds of teachers have been trained in the UK and have done it. So I guess I would say lack of knowledge is part of it. And the science, which is not quite in its infancy, but about in its toddlerhood, I think may help us tell what works for well-being. But certainly the first step is to measure it, and then to ask the question, when you introduce different policies, to ask not only what is their economic effect, but what is their effect on PERMA.
Much of what you're saying in some ways fits very neatly into a sort of enlightenment vision. You're creating new knowledge, new insight, using experimental methods to improve life in all its aspects. And yet consistently, one of the findings of the research is that the people who often are happiest and flourish most are the ones with the strongest belief in God, religion, even a fundamental reading of the Bible or the Quran. Now, some of that you can explain by the fact that they have the social bonds, the engagement, and the meaning of your list. But I'm wondering how much of the science of flourishing may be in tension with, in a sense, the principles of enlightenment, and how you help us think that through.
I'm not sure I can answer its relationship to the Enlightenment, since I think of myself as a creature of the Enlightenment, but I can say something about the texture of the data about religion. So it turns out that the effects of religion have not been measured across PERMA, but only on a very limited number of things. And in particular, the best measured one is the relationship between religion and optimism. The more fundamentalist the religion, the more optimism, the less depression. So we found in America that Orthodox Catholics and Orthodox Jews were optimistic and non-depressed, and that Unitarians and Reform Jews were pessimistic and depressed. Turned out that's almost completely explained by the amount of hope in the religion. So when we quantified the variable of hope for the future in the liturgies, in the children's stories and the like, we found it was afterlife, high hope, that was the predictor of optimism and lack of depression. So what I want to say about meaning and purpose, I've argued, is one of the ineluctable things that free human beings are after. And across history, a very common way of getting that is organized religion. In my view, there are very many ways of belonging to and serving something that's bigger than you are, and it's particularly important for the M in PERMA.
But a principle of the Enlightenment was that ought and is were in alignment. The way of the world is also, in some ways, the way of virtue. Am I hearing you say that you basically believe ought and is are in alignment? There isn't a tension between what is morally right and what may lead to the maximum individual flourishing.
Well, I believe they're actually completely orthogonal. Aristotle, for example, believed that happiness, virtue, truth, and beauty were all the same thing. I think that's completely wrong, and that these are different human capacities, and that if you take PERMA, I think Osama bin Laden had a lot of PERMA, had a great deal of meaning in his life, seemed to have good relations with the people who with him, was quite engaged in what he did, and the best I could tell, with pretty high positive emotion. I think this man was condemnable, but not on grounds of PERMA, but on other grounds, on grounds of good versus evil. So I want to say that the study of well-being is completely different from the study of ought, the study of morality, which is different from truth, and which is different from